psychologist and author Dr. James Dobson, the voice you trust for the family you love. This is Family Talk with Dr. James Dobson, along with Ryan Dobson and Luann Crane.
Well, the school year is just about ready to start for many of our listeners, while others, like myself, have already spent many mornings in the carpool line, something you have yet to learn about, Ryan.
That's true, but we're thinking about it. Lincoln's at the age where everybody's talking about school and where are we going to send them and if we're going to send them. And so it is really appropriate that we dedicate a few days this week on the Family Talk broadcast to education and child development.
Well, child development is my field, Ryan, and so it's a pleasure to return to that topic today, especially here with the start of a new school year. And it takes me back to my own graduate work at the University of Southern California, where I was working on a PhD in child development. And I knew that there had been a very gifted student who had preceded me at the university, and his name was Raymond Moore. And by that time, he was a very well-known speaker and author, but I had never met him. And then about 9 years later, I was speaking in Seattle, and a woman who had heard me speak approached me, and she handed me a copy of a book. The name of the book was Better Late Than Early, and it was written by Dr. Raymond Moore. And in this book, he laid out some revolutionary ideas about children doing well in the very early years, even if they were not involved in formal education. That idea had not occurred to me. And in fact, I had learned the opposite in my graduate work because at that time, early childhood education was everything, and you wanted to get 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds into formalized education. So I invited Dr. Raymond Moore to be a guest on our program, and what he had to say that day set me on fire and frankly set our listeners on fire, because what he said was the precursor to the homeschools movement. And the rest is history, as they say.
Well, we'll be talking more about homeschooling right now in 2010 on our program tomorrow and the next day, so it's highly relevant, but this really formed the foundation for that discussion. Now, you did mention that this recording is rather old. Listeners will hear a very young Dr. James Dobson, and the quality of the audio is not what people are used to.
It was 3 decades ago, Luann.
As you mentioned, Dr. Raymond Moore really has become the pioneer in this movement. He did pass away in 2007, but everybody reverts to his wisdom now.
Absolutely. And, you know, with his passing, the world lost an incredible educator and thinker. He was a public school teacher, superintendent, a principal in the state of California. And after completing his PhD at the University of Southern California, he held the positions of academic dean and president of numerous colleges all over the world.
Well, so you can see why any parent who's considering the best educational option for their young children will really want to pay close attention. Here now on this Family Talk broadcast is Dr. James Dobson's interview with the late Dr. Raymond Moore.
Well, I want to talk to you today and get you to talk to our listeners about your very important book, Better Late Than Early, and your second book, School Can Wait. Give us the main theme of those 2 books.
Well, essentially, we have found, first out of my wife's remedial reading experience, where she found that most of her remedial reading students were youngsters who had gone to school very early. These are problem students, learning students. We find that about 70% of all of the behavior problems today are youngsters who have gone to school very early. So we began studying this intensively about 10 to 15 years ago, and have gone through over 7,000 studies besides our teens at Stanford and University of Colorado Medical School and in Michigan, and have determined that, in fact, that if you could keep your child out until at least 8 to 10 years of age and give him a good, happy home life, and there are simple ways of doing this, then put him into school with his age mates, I emphasize that, with his age mates at about grade 2 or 3 or 4, depending upon his age, the child will do in a few months or less what the other children have with anxiety and frustration taken years to do. he will shortly catch up and pass those other children and come out better academically, that's achievement-wise, and socially and behaviorally than the children who went to school early. So we're saying that, by the way, this is a very old-fashioned idea. This is, during most of the history of this country, we put our children into school at 12 and 13 and 14. Mm-hmm. This is just the last 100 years, 75 years or so, we started moving down and down. And even John Dewey warned about this. Angelo Rossi warned about this. The great Gesell of Yale. We've had many leaders warning us about this, but it's conventional wisdom and practice to put them into school early.
Now let's make sure that our listeners really heard you. You are saying that a child, a normal, healthy child, perhaps not developmentally slow, not having a particular problem, not having visual problems, but the average normal child, if there is such a creature, should not be enrolled in preschool, kindergarten, first grade or second grade, but held out till he's 8 or 10 years of age and then plugged into where he would have been had he started in that program.
I'm saying that the normal child or the very bright child, the brighter the child, the greater the danger that he's going to have problems, whether they're learning failure problems or delinquency problems or peer dependency. That's the worst of all, the peer dependency factor.
That grows out of early
that's by far the most dangerous when you can remedy the learning failure.
Sure.
But, and quite readily, if you have a very good remedial teacher. I don't want to say you can always do this, but generally you can. But peer dependency is, in fact, like a cancer, and cancers are not easy to heal.
Now, explain what you mean by peer dependency. How does going to the first grade at 6 years of age contribute to that problem?
Well, at 6, of course, if a child is in their late 6s, it probably won't be so bad as if he's in their late 5s or early 6s. The later the child goes to school up to 7 or 8, the better.
Yes.
But the child that goes to school, remember, at 6, is not able yet to reason consistently from cause to effect. And when he goes out there and he learns those manners and habits and speech and so on from the other little children, which is called social contagion by Uri Bronfenbrenner of Cornell. When he learns that social contagion and he comes home with those bad manners and you start remonstrating to your child, he doesn't really understand you. And so he gives your values the back of the hand and latches on to the values of his peers. This child becomes dependent upon them for his decisions. He is unable to make decisions desirably on his own. This is a social cancer.
Now, we think of adolescence as a time when kids are most vulnerable to the group. Why are you saying the opposite, that the younger the child, the more vulnerable he is to the group?
I'm not denying that this about adolescence. As a matter of fact, I'm not denying it about you and me in adulthood. Of course, unfortunately, here I came with a tie today.
And you feel uncomfortable, don't you?
I'll loosen it up. But I was going to say here that we must realize that the little guy has become more vulnerable and more vulnerable until now that Alfred Bandura of Stanford says that what we once thought was a sort of a syndrome of adolescence has now become common in preschool.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, we now think of it as an adolescence thing.
They're already worried about being criticized and left
definitely.
out and not included and laughed at.
Peer dependency is clearly now a one of the psychological symptoms of the preschool child. We're talking about 3 and 4 and 5.
Now, what other kinds of problems develop from a young child sitting in class, learning to spell, learning to read, and all the rest of those academic skills?
Well, in the first place, we said he's not able to reason consistently. So what quality of learning do you want from the child? If you want thoughtful learning that is based upon some experience, a depth of experience, and thoughtfulness, a child that can answer why and how and so on, and wants to know those answers, then you'd better wait until after he's able to reason consistently, which is not until late 7s to middle 11s. Let me ask you, you've seen tadpoles? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, they have a little tail. They're born, they look like little oval things with a tail, but pretty soon they start growing the legs. Suppose they say, look, let's rush this thing a little bit, shall we? Let's get him to jumping. So take him out of the water and put him out on the grass or the floor and let him start hopping. This is what we're doing to our kids.
I came through USC in the 60s when this message of early childhood education was paramount, and I had that drilled into me, and I bought it, I accepted it, and since then I have come to the decision that all of that was suspect, and I find myself squarely in your camp today. But we are in the minority. The vast majority in society Famous men like Bloom and Bruner and other people are still saying early childhood education is necessary to give a child a superior mind, aren't they?
Yeah. If they would take and define early childhood education as a desirable parental upbringing, then I would agree with them. But when they start saying he has to have schooling and he has to have organized, programmed learning of that type, you can't agree. If you will look at the statistics today of learning failure and delinquency, you can't possibly say that our schools are doing a great job. Now, what I'm willing to say is that it's not all the school's fault. I'm saying that I shouldn't say most, but a great deal of this trouble is directly related to putting the child into school early, and by the time that he should be going to school, which is not before 8 to 10, or not before grade 2 or 3 or 4, let's say especially grade 3 or 4, the child has already lost his interest in school. Most children, before they get out of the 3rd or 4th grade today, are already tired of learning. They're on a motivational plateau, on a learning plateau, and most of them never get off of it. What we need to make as a bigger thing is the child's character traits. Is he responsible? Is he dependable? Is he orderly? Does he have a sense of self-worth? This is the big thing. Not the child that is dependent upon his peers. We want a child to feel part of the family corporation, to feel needed and wanted and depended upon. But the child is not given that chance. He's not given a track. You keep him in there just till he almost gets started, and then you thrust him out into the crowd way before he's ready.
In seeking evidence that relates to your thesis, Ray, comment on the results of the Head Start movement, which was really the primary government program designed to get kids off to a good start.
Yeah, I was with the U.S. Office of Education when that program got started. I wasn't in that particular department. I was graduate programs officer, but it was, you see, when they started out with that, they were not given a chance to do the thing they really wanted to do. They were more concerned about the social development of the child and relating to parents. But they got more into the so-called achievement factors, trying to make a child, stimulate him mentally and so on, like Bloom said to do,
yes.
University of Chicago professor. But as it turns out, the only thing that you can really, really say for sure that Head Start has done, and that's even questionable by some people, but I think that the only thing that you can really say is that they have helped more parents become more conscious of their youngsters' need for them.
Mm-hmm.
And otherwise, I don't think that you can really justify the expenditure of the billions that we spent.
Now, this is not just a kind of a private opinion that you formed in working with kids. You have accumulated masses of data and hard research
yes.
documented, haven't you?
I think on the you're speaking about the Head Start thing now. Of course, the Westinghouse studies, these various other studies have been recently a consortium study that tended to speak to favorably of Head Start. Even then, the essentially best thing that has come out of Head Start has been relating of the parent to the child. And we're for that. But why can't you do that with homeschools? Why can't you do that with what they now call Home Start, where you're going into the homes and helping parents to understand
Work with the kids.
their children, yes.
What should a child experience in the home in the years before 8 or 10?
Oh, I like that question. Of course, we want to be sure that the fathers are helping the mothers with a very good pregnancy, making them happy, and the father, if he has 51% of the authority, let him have 51% of the responsibility and love and kindness, and so that authority and responsibility.
That's something we can get our teeth into. And
I feel this is very important. If a man would do that, we wouldn't be having the feminism movement that we have today. But if the child has a fairly good upbringing during that first year, he's probably walking and pretty happy and healthy by the time he's a year old. Or shortly after that, maybe it'll be a few months after that. But when he starts walking, start him working. Put a little box in the corner and let him put his toys away before he goes out to the market with you or out walking or whatever. That child is learning order and neatness and responsibility. Pretty soon he's helping you make the bed, set the table or take the plastic dishes off the table. You're not going to put glasses on there. But anyway, this child is learning to feel needed and wanted and depended upon. That child develops a sense of self-worth, which is the essential dynamic of positive sociability, and he's not going to have it without that. This is the kind of thing. I'd be reading with my child 20, 30 minutes a day, have lots of books around, rest with a child, work with a child, play with a child, eat with a child. This is the highest type, the parental example, the highest type of learning a child can have on a one-to-one basis. The children who are doing the things I'm telling you about, that is, who are working and reading and resting and so on with the parents at home and having responsibility, these children almost invariably, we have over 500 of these right now in our recent study, and every single one of them has come out well.
Let me just say to the parent who's listening, who is perhaps hearing this recommendation for the first time, that their child be kept out of school till he's 8 or 10 years of age, and if you really have reason to question the validity of that statement, let me ask you, if you have an older child and you sent him to kindergarten at 5 years of age, do you remember the knot that you had in your stomach that first morning when you saw him toddle off to school there, and you just knew he was going to get chewed up there? You knew how vulnerable he was and how wide open to hurt and pain and influence of various sorts he was. And what you're saying, Dr. Moore, is that maybe we shouldn't subject him to those influences.
Well, the great Arnold Gesell, perhaps the greatest child educator in the history of our nation, said, rather, it would be better to take him out into nature and just be quiet and let nature do the teaching.
Isn't that beautiful?
Not put more pressures on. That's our problem. We can't resist putting pressures on our children. We've got so many on ourselves, we have to share them with the children instead of giving them a chance to grow naturally.
What I'd like to discuss with you today are the practical implications of that, especially in the day of women's liberation, where women are being told to get through with motherhood just as quickly as possible and to get on with more important things. How in the world can you recommend to these women that they stay home with each child until he is 8 or 10 years of age?
Well, I feel very sympathetic for the average woman under the pressure she's under today. But most of these women are at the mercy of their children, because today you're supposed to give the child everything, entertain him, and so on. But this isn't the way we're suggesting you rear your child. We're saying when the child starts walking, start him working with you and assisting around the house. Pretty soon he's part of the corporation. Some of your responsibility is shucked off onto him eventually, and you shouldn't be entertaining him all day long. He should be sleeping several hours a day.
Ray, how do you feel about the pressures that are on mothers today and what it's doing to their self-esteem and sense of fulfillment?
Well, I feel very tender and sympathetic toward mothers. I have a wife I've had her for 41 years, and I feel sympathetic toward the single mother, and for their comfort, I'd like to tell them to find the best kind of family home or daycare possible for their children. In the process, to realize that the child who knows that his mother does not really want to put him out of the home does not tend to feel so rejected as the child who knows that his mother doesn't have to put him out of the home. The child really senses this. I'd like to point out that I believe it was God's design for motherhood to be the most noble office on the face of the earth. Man was to be her protector. Now, what we need to do is to help the mother feel that she is doing a truly responsible thing, which she is doing, and if she will use her child in the sense that he will become her helpmate, instead of indulging that child at every turn.
And she becoming his slave.
Right. Then she will soon find out that it's a tremendously rewarding experiment of seeing this young life flower before her, learning responsibility and dependability and order and promptness and industry, and in these grosser qualities, learning the sweetness of good manners and graces and trust and patience, to absolutely deliberately set out to train the child in this way. There's so few people that are taught that way anymore. You know how old Christ was when he went to school, don't you? Well, Christ didn't go to school, but he was not even allowed to go to the rabbinical school to make his tryout until he was 12. And these were the ages at which children went to school in those days. Huh. Christ was given the chance until he was able to reason, at least, consistently from cause to effect, which the Jews tended to believe was about 12.
Mm-hmm. It's a shame he didn't have the benefit of early childhood education.
But isn't it interesting that Jean Piaget, the great Swiss psychologist, now comes up with very similar statements. A child learns to reason why, or from cause to effect, what we call his cognitive development, tends to burgeon between about late 7s to middle 11s.
Ray, you said in your book, Better Late Than Early, that preschool represents an assault on the integrity of a child. What do you mean by that?
That means several things, Jim. A child is not given a chance to be his own man, for one thing.
How so?
Well, the young child is, when he's thrown out to the group of the other children, he is never given a chance to be an independent thinker. This child is subject to all kinds of influences which keep him from being on a sound values track. But I tell you that there's a great deal to be said for giving a child that single track of family values, so that you don't clutter his value system before he's able to reason from cause to effect, and give you reason of the hope that's within him.
One of the reasons that I feel it so deeply is because I've experienced it. As I indicated earlier, in my own training program, I was taught that early childhood education is the wave of the future, and that if you're really going to produce a superior intellect, you better get started early, hopefully in the first year of life, and to get panicky about teaching him to read and all these advanced intellectual themes. And I believed that, but I no longer do. And I even believed the importance of preschool kinds of experiences. And after our daughter was born, my wife continued to teach school for 2-3 days a week. And one of the reasons was to allow our little girl to begin to get some, quote, socialization skills, unquote. And we took her to what was recommended to be an excellent preschool program. I remember one day that I took Danae to that school, and as I started to leave her, she turned around and grabbed me around the neck and hung on to me. And it was different from the usual grasping and holding that a toddler will do, because there was terror in her eyes. And she just screamed, and I could not pull her out of my arms. And the woman who ran the preschool program was pulling on her from the other side. And I took her back in my arms, and we left together and went out in the car. And I said, Danae, you will never again have to go back. I don't know what took place there that caused that reaction, but you will never have to return. And since she has gotten older, I've asked her about that preschool and what she remembers. And she's described some pretty terrible things that were going on there. Now, this is not intended as an indictment of preschool programs, because there are an awful lot of preschool teachers that love the kids just like they were their own. But still, I think we are exposing a very vulnerable child at a very tender age of life to circumstances we're not totally, that we can't predict with 100% accuracy. And if it is possible for a mother to keep her sanity and do some of that teaching and, quote, socialization, unquote, at home, and not feel quite so much pressure to get started with formalized education, I think we're a long ways ahead.
And even the child who feels forced to go to school, or should I say, by the social pressures of other children,
yes,
very often seems excited to go to school, may also feel rejected as much as the child that feels as yours did. I just want to add this one other thing, and that is that Dr. Joseph Wetman of the University of Chicago points out that academically, if we would keep our children out until at least 8 or 9, we could reduce the reading failure rate of our nation to 2%. That comes from the nation's leading perception psychologist.
It's incredible. Ray, I don't want to patronize you, but you're a very courageous man to take a stand on such an unpopular subject. And you've not only done it, but you've done it professionally and ethically, and I admire you and appreciate the work you're doing.